even if I know you are mostly focused on the investment market, I will do a very short presentation on the rental market, as it is an essential driver of the investments. Where is the letting market in France? Mostly in the Paris region, as Paris region is a kind of barometer for the French market. Where is this market at mid 2020? The first and the most important information for this market is the decline in take-up. This decline had started before the crisis for 18 months now. For instance, last year ended with a result close to the 10-year average. So, unlike the investment market, the rental market has therefore approached the COVID crisis in a more or less fragile situation. The decline has been amplified since the spring with lockdown. For instance, during the second quarter of the current year, less than 2,000 square meters were rented. It's the worst quarterly results in more than 10 years. In total, since the beginning of the current year, take-up has been limited to 670,000 square meters, down 40% in comparison or compared to last year. And we very clearly fell below the 10-year average, which is over 1 million square meters. I also have to add that these results could have been worse without taking into account the rental of the Link by Total. The Link is a twin tower project in La Défense, developing 130,000 square meters, and which will be completed within the next 5 years. So this transaction alone represents almost 20% of the total take-up observed in the first half of the current year. So I think that's the most impressive illustration of the impact of the COVID crisis. Concerning the vacancy, as a result of a drop in transactional activity, the vacancy has risen slightly since the end of last year. However, it remains at low levels since the vacancy rate is only at 5.5% at the end of June. So there's no problem of oversupply globally in Paris region. The increase should continue in the next few months. For instance, if you have a view on future completions, 340,000 square meters of new or refurbished areas are expected to be delivered in the second half of the year. And for next year, for instance, it's more than 780,000 square meters, available square meters, which will be completed. So we probably have an increase of the supply during the next quarters. The situation within the Paris region is not the same everywhere, and there's some very varied profile between the different submarkets. For instance, in inner Paris, there's clearly, even with the slight increase we saw during the last months, in a situation of undersupply with a vacancy rate of less than 2%, for instance, in the CBD, while in the same time in the Western Crescent, for instance, we often have vacancy rates close to or above 10%. So there's some very different situation. The other point, important point concerning the vacancy or the available supply is to keep in mind that the supply is marked by the obsolescence, since only 21% of available supply have been delivered for less than 5 years. I also have to add that in the future months, with the increase of available completion, this problem of obsolescence will be less important. And last point concerning the letting market, an important market for landlords, I think, that's the rents with on one side the prime rents. So I just have to explain you the figure you are seeing on your screen concerning prime rents. It's an average between the 5 most expensive rentals sold during in a rolling year. For instance, you have a very big increase during the last quarter, and that's clearly an impact of the letting of the 96 Siena by Goldman Sachs at more than 960 euros per square meter. So concerning the rents, especially in CBD, they have increased significantly over the past year. The prime rent is now at more than 930 euros in the second quarter of the current year, up 10% over 1 year. So that's the point on the letting market. Concerning the investment market, the situation is a bit different. As unlike the rental market, investment has approached the crisis in a good shape. A very large investment volume was recorded in the first quarter with more than 7 billion euros for France, which made it the best start ever observed. Clearly, the activity slowed in the second quarter, falling to 4.4 billion euros. In total, since the start of the year, we have quite 12 billion euros, which have been invested in France. This is less important than the volume of last year at the same period, with a decrease of 17%. That's clearly different with the letting market. We are still clearly over the 10-year average, which is at 10 billion euros. The fact is, we have to underline that the transactions recorded during the last months had started before the crisis. It's important to know that they are coming to an end and they have not been cancelled, but the question is now the ability of the market to generate some new sales. So it's therefore possible that the slowdown on the investment market, the slowdown linked to the COVID crisis, may continue in the third quarter. Just a quick analysis of the investment volume during the first half of the year. So just want to say again, that's provisional results, but there's three main trends. That the success of industrial assets, with a share growing from 10% last year to 17% of total investment volume, and also an increase, and that can be a bit surprising, of the share of retail assets, but quite simple explanation for this increase of retail share. That's the very big sale by Unibail-Rodamco for more than €1 billion of a portfolio of shopping center. The second important trend, and it's not a surprise because it's always the same thing during crisis, is that the market is clearly more focused on domestic investors, with a share of quite 2/3 of the investment volume generated by domestic investors. The other point, and that's due to the success of national portfolio. For instance, when I was saying that there's a big increase of the share of industrial assets, that's mostly through the sale of a big national portfolio. So the share of the Paris region in the total investment volume in France is decreasing during this period. And last point, but important one, with quite few things to say by now, it's concerning the yields. The fact is, if you, with the exception of shopping center, where we saw a slight increase of the yield, of the prime yield, during the last quarter, the prime yields are quite stable, with less than 3% for office prime assets and a bit more than 4% for industrial. The fact is, there's no clear impact on prime yields, impact of the crisis on prime yields. The impact of the crisis is more on the secondary yields. And the fact is, if we can guess that the prime yields will remain quite stable even in the next few months, the gap between prime yields and secondary yields will increase with a wider scale in terms of yields.